Here's what I make of the bigger picture and what some of us so-called COVIDiots, anti-vaxxers, Putin apologists, fascist, far-right extremist, swivel-eyed loons want to talk about next. Whatever is happening in Ukraine to that country and to its people, both are undoubtedly being used by those who also need something and someone to make their own populations look the other way. The horror show in the Ukraine is being exploited. Here at home last week, Boris implied that while only lesser mortals are fretting selfishly about heat and food, his attentions are focused on the lofty heights of saving the world. The little people of Britain must endure cold and hunger for, guess what, the greater good. Anyone with even the faintest grasp on, at least an interest in geopolitics, knows it's utterly bogus, and he is a fraud, along with Biden, Trudeau, Macron, von der Leyen, and the rest of a list so long I don't have time to read it out. The imminent cold and hunger were made inevitable not by Putin in 2022, but years ago by the adoption of ruinous, ideologically driven nonsense presented as world-saving environmental policies that only denied us any hope of energy independence, the profitable exploitation of all the resources beneath our feet and seas, and condemned much of Europe to dependence on Russia. What we are paying is the cost of going green when those policies are not green at all, but predicated upon some of the most destructive and toxic practices and technologies ever conceived. Wind and solar will never provide the energy we need to keep thriving as societies, to grow and flourish. The situation is so insane, I find it easiest to conclude we are simply meant to do without. Stop thinking we're all going to have cars and international travel and warm homes, just different than before. What seems obvious is that we're being groomed to live small lives, to make way for the grandiose expectations and entitlements of the elites that are working so effectively to hoover up the last of the wealth. Smaller lives, colder lives, may actually be the best we can hope for, given the plans evidently laid out for us by those with their hands on the levers of power. Our leaders used to tell us we needed them in order to be free. In future, they will have us believe we need them to be safe. Caged animals are safe, but it's not much of a life. Energy prices will keep going up. This will obviously hurt the poorest countries and poorest people first and worst. What is obvious about the Green Warriors making war on affordable, reliable energy is that they care not a jot about the poor, at least not the actual poor, alive in the world today. Those real flesh and blood people are to be sacrificed by the millions, utterly denied the energy that might have lifted them out of poverty, so that imaginary people, as yet unborn, might thrive in a utopia that exists only in the imaginations of pampered protesters. China will just burn more coal to compensate and seize more control, but shh, best not mention it. That corrupted thinking comes from communism, or perhaps communism's idiot cousin, socialism. Green Warriors don't care about the poor, in the same way socialists don't care about the poor. They just hate the rich, which is ironic, given that with their infantile protests they're doing the work of the very richest for them. Ukraine produces a fifth of the wheat crop required by the poorest. Not this year though. Whatever has been grown will be hard to store and harder to export, so that hunger and full-blown famine becomes a looming threat for hundreds of millions of the world's hungriest people. In richer countries, life is being made deliberately impossible for farmers. Spiking costs of fertilisers and fuel are one thing, but governments in the Netherlands, across Europe, in Canada and elsewhere around the world are persecuting those who grow our food. Farmers are being made to endure restrictions that destroy their businesses, being driven off their land altogether. They'll have to watch as fields they have known and cared for over generations are hoovered up by transnational organisations with other ideas about what that land might be used for. If you think mass migration and immigration are difficult problems now, wait until the unavoidable famines cause a hemorrhage of humanity out of the poorest countries of Africa and the Middle East. Perhaps hundreds of millions of people with nothing more to lose. Where do you think they'll go? And here's another inconvenient truth. Money and weapons keep flowing into Ukraine, but despite months of war and sanctions, the Russian ruble remains strong and an end to hostilities seems as far away as ever. Maybe no one wants that war to end. Wars don't determine who's right anyway. Wars determine who's left. Ultimately, this is all about wealth and power. Not money, remember. Money is to wealth as a menu is to a steak. One's a worthless bit of paper, the other something that will keep you alive. This is about actual wealth and its acquisition. It's about the already super rich getting hold of even more of the real things: land, buildings, natural resources, gold. While we are supposed to be frightened out of our wits, squabbling among ourselves and just hoping that one day it will all be over, a relative handful of others are hoovering up all the wealth as planned. Whichever way you slice it, an economic and societal shock on a scale that has not happened in lifetimes, if ever, is on its way. The world we live in is built in its entirety upon unimaginable and now unsustainable levels of debt. Trillions, quadrillions of dollars worth. There's always much more debt in the world than money, so that it's never possible to settle the debt. Now that debt, all that created money, is about to come crashing down. Don't be fooled by Sunak and the rest and their about-face, their pretense that they were with us all along. COVID and lockdown carried them only so far, but they plan to go much further. Disease, war, famine, death. The same people always ride on the same 4 horses. Now is not the time to take our eyes off the ball, not by a long chalk. Keep watching the usual suspects. As I say, you ain't seen nothing yet.